Welcome back to Module 5 of HTML5 Application Development Fundamentals. I'm Cullen, and we're going to get started right now with understanding CSS essentials. Focus on layouts and the user interface today, okay? So we're going to start off by talking about the UI, the user interface, the CSS box model, then move on to the Flexbox box model, a new feature in CSS3, and finally we'll talk about grid layouts. All right, without further ado, the user interface. The user interface is the portion of a web page that we interact with as users. There you see the Microsoft Virtual Academy website there on the right, a nice little screenshot. It's essentially the way that the page is laid out. Layouts range from minimalist with just a couple of elements here and there to more complex pages that are just jammed full of content. And I'd say that the Microsoft Virtual Academy is very cleanly developed, so I applaud whoever worked on it. It lies somewhere between the middle of a minimalist layout and something that would be more complex. All right, a quick note here. We're going to talk about some features that may or may not still be experimental based on the time of you viewing this video. As with HTML5, CSS3 is still in draft format, and so it might not be compatible with all browsers, so we have to use these things called vendor prefixes, right? These are workarounds for these compatibility problems. So what we have to do is if we're using a property name that is still experimental, we have to add a vendor prefix in front of it. Of course, that's what makes it a prefix, right? But it's simply a keyword that's surrounded by dashes, and we've got this nice little chart over here on the right to help you out in case you find anything confusing at all, right? Today we'll be using the Microsoft prefix since we'll be checking out our code examples on Internet Explorer. Let's talk about the CSS box model first. The CSS box model defines the rules for how content appears on a web page, right? So it's not just that we have text on a page, it's a lot more complex than that. And each element of HTML is a box that contains multiple components. Okay, so you have your content here on the inside. So this would be like a paragraph of text. And then outside that, but in between the content and the border is something called padding, right? So if you added border around an element, you can change the padding of the content in order to provide a little bit more space between the words, per se, and the border on the outside. And then next you have the margin. And the margin is really the area that sits between the element itself and another element. And we'll sort of experiment with this a little bit later, and hopefully I'll be able to show you a really good example that'll help it stick. All right, so let's go back and revisit block level and inline elements. So previously I talked about block level elements, and with the box model, block level elements create boxes that are a part of a page's layout. And so this is your headers, your articles, your sections. Paragraphs are also block level elements as well. And so we've got this nifty chart over here. Quite a few things we're familiar with. Block level, a good way to think of that is that if you add one of these elements to the page, it's naturally going to create its own line, right? Like it's going to be underneath the element previous to it, okay? Inline elements, on the other hand, are simply used to format content. And so this includes our elements like emphasis and maybe images, right? And then also links. You got the A tag there. Strong if you're trying to boldface something. Those are all inline elements. And so if you want them to appear on their own line, you would have to use the break tag, right? Jot out there. A little bit better than my last attempts at writing with my fingers. All right. And within this box model, we have, there are certain relationships that we have to pay respect to, right? It's called a parent-child relationship. Sometimes you'll place one box or one element inside of another, right? So nesting in HTML. And the outer box is referred to as the parent, which nests the child, right? So the child box is inside of the parent box. What's really important about cascading style sheets is that a child element is going to inherit CSS styles from the parent. Okay, what that means is that if we style a parent element to say have a blue underline, the child element is also going to inherit that style. Now, it's not the case for all CSS properties, but it is something that we do have to pay really close attention to and just be aware of in case we start styling wildly and we end up noticing some things that don't look quite right, okay? So there are a couple of problems with the CSS box model, and it's that some browsers are going to apply properties differently, right? So height and width are supposed to be separated attributes, but sometimes they aren't treated as such by older browsers. You aren't going to really stumble into this problem too often, but if it does happen, you definitely want to be aware of it, and you want to make sure that you're ready to handle it in your code, right? So. All right, so now we've talked about the user interface. We talked about the box model. Let's talk about flex boxes. Flex boxes are new in CSS3. CSS3 now includes the flexbox box model. Try saying that 10 times fast. It's really hard. The flexbox box model is a layout mode that provides flexibility when a user changes the size of their browser window. So you might start off with a browser window that's, I don't know, however many pixels wide this box is that I just drew. Well, if we expand the size of that window, sometimes we want our content to expand in order to fill it as well. And so you have certain elements like navigation bars, forms, and pictures. You want them to resize and reposition based on the amount of space that's available. We use something called media queries within CSS3 to help us determine which kind of device is being used. So then all the content on our page automatically adjusts our HTML document in order to fit the screen. Okay. So an element is defined as a flex box using the display property. Okay, we'll go ahead and demo this here in just a little bit, but the display property possesses two values. You've got flexbox and inline flexbox. Okay, a flexbox is going to be a block level element, and then an inline flexbox is going to be an inline level element. And so what that means is that if it's inline, maybe you could set it inside of text. Whereas if it's block level, it's going to be on its own line of text unless you're using a float property to float it to the left or the right of the screen. I'm just real quickly going to review a couple of these Flexbox properties and values. You could definitely download these slides and check them out on your own. So if I do go too fast, I apologize, but download the slides and you can always give it a quick Bing search too, okay? So with the flex property, you can give it a positive value and a negative value. And so you can make them flexible by height or width as well, right? And we'll demo this in just a second so you can see exactly what I mean. Go to the next slide here. You can actually also set the flex direction. So if you have elements like we do here with 1, 2, and 3, we can go ahead and set them so that they're set up in a row or a column, or we can go ahead and do a row reversal or a column reverse. So, you know, it would go 3, 2, 1 from the left to the right or from top to bottom. Flex flow too, we also got to be, excuse me, we can set the direction or the flex wrap properties at the same time using flex flow. So flex flow is shorthand for the flex direction and flex wrap. And then we'll take a quick look at some others here. You can change the order of how the child boxes inside of a flex box appear on the screen with our flex order property. And then, like I had mentioned, flex wrap earlier, you can wrap your elements so that they drop down a line within the flex box too. So let's talk a little bit more about these using some visuals. I find it pretty helpful to always look at a picture. So when working with flex boxes, it's really important to know that a parent box can have a child box, right? This is part of what makes the flexbox box model so awesome. Okay, with the flex property, we make the flexbox items flexible as well. So when we increase the size of our parent box, we can also increase the size of each of our child boxes. The flex property is used to, I guess you would say, and I actually nailed it on the head in the slide, to proportionally scale the flex box items when its parent box increases or decreases in size. So if we decrease the size of that parent box, we would shrink the size of the element, the children elements. So you guys, all these tongue twisters are getting me tired, so I do apologize. You can also change the direction of child items, right? Like we had mentioned before. And so we use the flex direction property in order to do that. You can go back and take a look at the table that featured the row reverse, column, and column reverse values to learn a little bit more about that. The flex wrap property, which is shown here, makes the third child, if the screen size shrinks, right, from the left to right in this instance, you can make the third child drop down a line, right? And we can do that with the wrap value. The flex flow property sets the flex direction once again, and the flex wrap properties at the same time. I think when you're getting started, it's really important to use flex direction and flex wrap so that you understand exactly what's happening before you start using the flex flow property and going with shorthand there, okay? Let's go ahead and take a quick look at a Flexbox demo now. So I'm going to jump over to Web Matrix. Go ahead and maximize this so you can see it. And we're going to open up the Flexbox demo, okay? So let's take a quick look at this code here. So I use the display property, as we mentioned in a previous slide, with the MS prefix here for Flexbox in order to make, or rather, in order to create an ID that can be applied with Flexbox properties, right? So if I go down to my code here, I've created a div that we've labeled as my Flexbox, right? So here, my Flexbox is the ID, and we've assigned that ID to this parent div. So now we've got our Flexbox items on the inside, and I'm going to have 2 that are ID'd with child blue, and then 2 that are green. Actually, that's not even correct. Because I have 2, I should make these a class, okay? So I'm going to fix that error in my code right now, and we're going to make sure that we apply classes and not IDs. IDs should be applied to unique elements. Just how it goes, right? Each one of us is unique. So we want to make sure that we're identified as such, and I'm sure if our HTML elements could talk, they would probably feel the same way. Maybe with JavaScript, we will make them talk later, but that's a different lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I save that by hitting Control-S. And now I've got 4 different children items that'll fit inside this Flexbox here, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up the flex direction as row. So I'm going to cut these guys out. I just had them there so that we can demo that in our slide. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up for wrap so you can see what happens. I've set the color, the background color of the Flexbox as gray, and then our height as auto in order to make sure that we fit each of the children elements. So let's launch this in the browser. And there we have all 4 of our Flexbox items inside of the larger Flexbox. So it's pretty cool stuff. So now, if I shrink this, look at what happens. The top left corner of the browser is 1, then 2, then 3, and 4 went ahead and wrapped around to the bottom. Let's see what happens with 3. Oh, same thing when we decrease the size of our browser. So Flexboxes are pretty darn cool. They definitely help us make the most of our screen space, no matter the size of our screen. So let's go ahead and let's mess with this and see what happens if we apply the row reversed value to our flex direction property. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page now. Whoops. Row reverse. And now we've reversed the order of our flex boxes. So now we're going from 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, of course, if we go ahead and we change this to column, all of a sudden we're going to see, let me pop that up a little bit. Forgot to save. Now we're going to see all of our children of our Flexbox items being displayed in a column. And of course, you can reverse that as well. Remember that the wrap value for the flex wrap property allows us to make sure that if we decrease the size of our screen, our Flexbox items will drop down to the next line and they'll wrap around to the next line. Okay? All right. Flexbox is pretty awesome. You can also order and arrange the content inside of a Flexbox by using the Flex Order property, right? The default value for the Flex Order property is 0 for each of the elements, and if you go ahead and increase that value, the higher the value is, the more, the order will change. So in this particular example, we have apple, orange, and pear all have a property value of 0, a flex order property value of 0. And so with the parent, if we change the value of orange to 1 and then leave apple at 0 and pear at 0, then orange will all of a sudden move to the front, right? So it's a good way to reorganize and rearrange the different Flexbox items. Okay. If you want to learn more about Flexboxes, go ahead and take a quick look at this link. And let me go ahead and go back to my pointer here. It's not letting me do it. All right, we'll have to go and take a look at that link here in just a second. There we go, got it. Don't know what was going on there, but we'll go ahead and we'll load up Internet Explorer slowly but surely. And here it is. The Microsoft Developer Network has a really, really great tutorial on Flexboxes, and I strongly suggest that you walk through it and experiment with your own code. It'll help you a lot in terms of learning this content. All right, next thing's next. Grid layouts. Grid layouts are wonderful, right? The Flexbox model is wonderful for simple, flexible layouts, but when you need to go more complex, you can use the grid layout model. And so the grid layout model is very similar. I guess I think of it as a kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, right? It's got columns and rows, and so it makes it really easy to organize your content based in the way that you like, right? That you want your user interface to appear for your users. Grids are extremely flexible, and they provide an easier to use option for organizing content than HTML tables would. You guys remember how big of a headache HTML tables seemed like in our second module, or maybe it was our third, I can't remember. But this is a much, much easier way to organize your content. And I'll show you here in just a second when we demo grid layouts. So grid layouts and grid items, right? Grid layouts, very similar to tables because they do have those rows and columns, but they're modular, and it allows you to move content from one part of the page to another with pretty great ease. Okay, and so here's an example of a grid layout over on the right. You have your masthead, which is like that huge picture and maybe some text that you see when you enter a splash page. And you've got navigation on the side, on the left side, with 3 columns for your display, and then footer at the bottom, right? That's sort of a standard and typical website layout. We define the grid layout by using the display property along with the grid or inline grid values. And so similar to how we use the display property with the Flexbox, we just use it with grid. And so the child elements in a grid, similar to Flexboxes, are called grid items, and they can be positioned according to grid tracks, grid lines, or grid cells. And you can take a look at what grid tracks, grid lines, and grid cells are there on your own in the table below. Here's some different grid properties and values. I'm not going to go ahead and take too much time to detail this. You can go ahead and download the slides. I'll definitely point you in the direction of a Microsoft Developer Network article for grid layouts, and that'll help you really understand all these different properties and values for grids. All right, let's take a look at a demo here real fast. Accidentally just exited out of my presentation, so you have to bear with me, but let's take a look at the grid demo. So I'm gonna make this full screen now. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at our code. So what I've done is I've created a div element here called gridded. I just gave it an ID of gridded, right? It's got two child elements inside of it, one with the ID item 1 and then one with the ID item 2, okay? In my CSS, I've gone through and I've added the ID selector for gridded, and I've set the display property to a value of msgrid like I had mentioned. I set the background gray so it's a little bit easier to see. And then now we've got the grid columns property, which we use to make our columns. So here I've set it to auto, and what'll happen is it'll make 5 columns. And CSS will automatically size those columns based on the width of my browser window, right? So whether I'm on a phone or whether I happen to be on a laptop, it's going to go ahead and it's going to automatically size all of those columns for me, which is really, really convenient because it means way less work for me. Can you imagine doing that with tables? I can't. I feel like it would be a bit of a headache. Next, we take a look at our grid rows, and here you see that I've defined 3 different rows. So I've got essentially what amounts to a grid of 5 columns and 3 rows. I've used the fraction units. So what this is 2 fractions of the page space that's available or of the document window. And so here, each of these rows is just 2 fractions. And we'll play with that in just a little bit so that you can see how changing this number will impact the size of a cell in the grid. Okay. Item 1 is orange. It's going to be located in row 1, column 1. And then item 2 is purple, and it's going to be located in row 2, column 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch in the browser. And there it is, right? So we see item 1 up top and item 2 down below. And let's pull this over so we can take a look at our source code. I apologize, things are not snapping correctly for me today, so do bear with me as I make adjustments. All right, so see located in 1-1 here, we've got item 1, which is orange, item 2, nothing's in the 3rd row, which is great. If I go up here and I change the fraction size, so maybe I make this 10 fractions, we'll go ahead and save that and then refresh the page. Let's see what happens. All of a sudden you see that we increase the height of the row, which means that we increase the height of the element that happens to be in it since we didn't define the height previously. Okay, so that's how grids work. It's just a basic introduction. You can do so much with a grid layout. I definitely suggest that you go ahead and take a look at that on your own time. And let me actually show you an article here that you can use to access a little bit more information about grids. All right, so right here, let me pop this back up real fast. If you click that, it'll pop up an Internet Explorer here. Once again, just a ton of information that's available for you from the Microsoft Developer Network. This is such a great, rich resource, and you see that we're on CSS right now. I strongly recommend checking out this entire CSS section. It's really, really helpful. Just take all the information that they give you, all these code snippets, play with them and experiment, and that'll help you learn and understand this stuff the best. There really is no better way to learn than to just figure things out by playing around, right? So. All right. So we're all done for this module. Let's do a quick recap here. We talked about the user interface, the CSS box model, the Flexbox box model. Once again, say it 10 times fast, and grid layouts. That's all we've got right now for this module, but we'll see you back in the next one in just a little bit.